Grüß, willkommen in einem anderen aufregendes video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case part 39 of my figure gaming hobby series. In this case I'll be investigating a common conundrum from anyone who is painting any kind of historical figures for gaming, which is what colours do I use and how do I match up new figures when I want to expand an existing force mix. A quick caveat, I'm not primarily a modeller and my primary focus is gaming. However, saying that, I still want a nice experience, so I do put some effort in the playing area and the figures. So if you're expecting a fantastic paint job, or how to do a fantastic paint job, and expert guides on how to make your figures look really fantastic and wonderful, then this may not be the correct video to view. My main focus is getting the colours right and then ensuring I can match those colours if I expand my force mix later. I'll cover some basic, and I mean basic, painting hints, but if you are currently an expert in painting, you will not be learning anything from me concerning painting. This video will be covering ancients, pike and musket, World War II, Cold War and moderns in terms of painting the figures. There are some differences between the periods. For World War II and later, we do have a reasonable idea of the colours which were historically used. We also understand those colours change with time, effects from weather and other external factors. So perhaps knowing what the original colour was may not be such a great advantage. For Napoleonics, we do have in theory the idea of the colours used, and I have to say theory, and it's a very rough idea indeed, and the weathering effects can be even more extreme. For ancients, by understanding what colours were available in the period, we can get an idea of the colours of the clothing, but once again, this is a very rough idea, and in most cases, ancients is all about wild guesswork and making your figures look good. So, if you've just received a delivery of your nice army, be it Persian, Russian 1812, German 1945, or Soviet 1989, what do you do now? The first step is to work out what colours you'll be using on the figures. I can recommend getting one of the relevant books for your figures from Osprey. These books contain a good overview of the army in question, and the plates in the centre are very helpful in seeing what the troops looked like and what colours to use. This shows an example from the Greek and Persian Wars book from Osprey, showing some of the troops used by Xerxes. The internet can also be a good source for these drawings. Some effort needs to be made in finding what you want, but you can identify a wide range of different troop types just by using Bling or Google or some other search engine. Other sources that you will find if you start searching on the internet are painting guides. This shows one from an Italian company, Italeri, showing Prussian cuirassiers. There are other sources such as magazine. This image is supposedly from an Airfix magazine showing you how to paint what I think are French cuirassiers. In addition to contemporary drawings, the Napoleonic War has a wide range of drawings from French and German sources, rather old sources but still very effective. I found a very good source of drawings from a German source, shown on the right, which offers a surprisingly wide range of different troop types and their colours, and I use this quite a bit. When we move to World War II, we can get a lot of good information from painting guides, which, of course, as I've indicated, can be found on the internet or you can purchase the books. What is rather good about these guides is that they often provide the actual paints which can be used. So in summary, my advice is to do your research and download as many images as you can and purchase as many books as you need to give yourself a good library of what your figures need to look like. A strong piece of advice, don't wing it. Even if the paint job may not be that good, always try and use the most authentic colours you can. I made the mistake of painting a lot of German 6mm figures incorrectly and I always regret it. Get the history right and even an average paint job will look good. Let's start with the easiest solution or period, which is to find an existing painting guide on the internet or on any other site or books and just follow it verbatim. All these paints are Valerio and these are commonly available in most countries across the globe. So in this particular case, you can just simply download this guide. You've got three choices here. You purchase the paints that you see here and you are okay. Using a painting guide can allow you to identify exactly the paints you need to purchase. So apart from one colour, This gives you all you need to paint a French 1940 heavy tank. If you have a short list of colours such as this, it becomes easy to only buy what you need instead of doing a lot of trial and error and thus purchasing paints that you'll never use again. Now, if your guide uses one particular range of paints, but you want to use a different range of paints, then you can use a guide which allows you to convert the paints, such as a conversion chart, as you can see here. One good choice is the model shade conversion chart. This is the front page that you'll see when you search for this on the internet. If we look at this example, in this case converting from a Tamiya XF10 into other brands, unfortunately this site does not support Vallejo, but there are other manual sites that you can fall back on, and also you can use standard colours such as the Federal Standard Colour Guide, RAL or RLM values, which are commonly available in the various ranges of paints that you can potentially match your paints with. Some paint guides provide you values for paints which are not readily available. Now, if you have a conversion chart, you can find the equivalent, so there's no problems. But let's say there is a lack of a conversion chart with this particular range of paints. If you use something like this, then the best method is to compare the colour charts from the paint suppliers with the image that you download. In this case, I've taken this image and matched the colours to Mr. Hobby and Tamiya paints. This will never be perfect, but some margin of error is allowed, as no paint will retain a single perfect colour in the field for long, so you can get away with a bit of a movement. Nonetheless, these colours, which is what I've used for my Italian, has provided me with the result that I so desire. Now, if all you have is the drawing of the tank, then you can follow the same process, but simply try and compare the paint guides with the colours that you see on the image. Now, in some cases you may need to, let's say, get the RGB values for the paint. So what you can see here is the dark brown here. It's pretty hard to match that, with a paint chart, but you can put your mouse cursor into it in the correct application, get an RGB value, and then create a larger blob of that paint, which you can then compare with your colour chart. Once you've done this, you may wish to place it on a sheet that you'll be using as your guide. Now, as most tanks were painted in different colours, preparing a single sheet covering the full range of colours you wish to use is useful, as you see here. What you see here is a small image of the image that you're doing the colour matching from, and the paints that you've matched them up with. Often when matching up paints, you'll find the same colour from different manufacturers. I tend to list all the options, which in this case is between Tamiya and Mr. Hobby. However, it's wise to identify your preferred brand of colour in some manner. In this case, this is so in case you want to come back and paint up some more figures for an existing force wicks, you actually get the correct paints matching up. Matching the colours of previously painted figures can be a major issue, so it's always critical to record what you've done at all times and make sure it's available when you want to paint the new figures. Otherwise, your figures won't exactly match. Now, look, I must admit, for something like 6mm on a large playing area, you may not even notice the fact that you've used on some figures Tamiya and on other figures Mr. Hobby, but I tend to believe that you should try and match it as closely as possible so you don't have even the small chance of not getting a good match. Now, as we move to Cold War, you use the same process for those vehicles. It's in this situation, it is important to do a lot of research. Most German tanks used the standard NATO camo in the later Cold War period, but did use other colour schemes earlier in the period. It will be wise to identify the period you'll be covering, or the army that your army will be, and then make sure you select the correct colours. I generally find that for German Cold War tanks, I always go with the NATO scheme, even though when the Leopard 2, for example, first came out, it was painted up in the unique German schemes that you can see in the bottom left. Now we come to Napoleonics. Many figures use reasonable base colours, as you can see in this example. White, red and bronze are the main colours used in this case. However, there are many other minor colours. Wood for the rifle, yellow for the insignia, and a brownish black for the top of the headgear. However, if the numbers of the troop type is low, you can actually get away with some variability. Notice that I'm not covering the colour of the horse. Painting up horse, it tends to be a rather unique thing. You'll need to do the research in terms of what kind of horse colours you want to range. I tend to use basically what you see here, a lighter brown colour for the actual horse and a darker colour for the mane, etc. And then make sure you put some imperfections over the horse, white shoes or white legs, white on the forehead, etc. or a lighter brown on the forehead, etc. That was dealing with small value troops or small number troops where you can get away with errors here and there. The real issue is what is going to be your base colour for your army. As the bulk of a Napoleonic army will be line infantry, it may be wise to ensure the main colour of these troops match and you've selected the correct colour. Historically, this is not required in some ways, as different troops will have different shaded uniforms on the same playing area or battlefield. But I tend to find uniformity does look nice on the playing area, unless of course you want to create a diorama. For Russian line infantry, it's difficult to find a good match for their uniform. I ended up with a rather dark green, but other sources indicate a lighter green. In this case, I feel the player can choose what they feel will look the best, but whatever you choose, make sure you are happy with it, because most of your figures will need to use that exact same colour if you want them all to match. If you are dealing with different troop types, then you may considering changing the green slightly so you can identify these troops on the playing area. In practice, unless you have great eyesight, this will not really be noticeable in the playing area unless the troops are physically next to each other. But it is something you could consider, and I tend to use a slightly different green for my Russian Yager troops. I've also found using other people's models as a good guide. In this case, a Russian Ulan. The blue here is unusually light, and I've found a few references which indicate this shade, but it looks nice and I've used it for my Russian Ulans accordingly. To assist me in matching paints, I've created my own paint charts using the original paint charts supplied by the manufacturers. Other options is to use paint charts supplied by the manufacturer itself. Taking one of these boxes and then pasting it into a drawing so you can compare colours is one rather imperfect way of getting a short list of colours, but whichever way you want to use it, that is create your own paint chart or use the original paint chart from the manufacturer and then just make sure you can cut and paste the various blocks of colour. You need to determine that yourself, but it's a good way to get an initial starting point for a matching process. It's not very perfect, but it's certainly a good way to go down this process, that is matching colours, when you've got no other information at all available. Now we come to ancients, and this is both much easier and much harder. Once you've found a drawing you like to base your painting on, it's generally easy to find the colours you need. Once again, make sure you record what you use in case you intend painting more figures later. Although for ancients this is rather rare. I often like getting a number of different drawings to use as for my painting guide. This shows a number of different images of Numidian horsemen. I match each colour, and once I've selected the colour I wish to use, I then insert it on this particular sheet. Now I don't have it on this sheet, but I normally put the box with the actual colour that I'm going to be using, which I use as my guide. Now a quick point about painting. While I spray an undercoat on all my figures, either black so I can get that kind of base effect, or a primary colour of the figure to ensure there are no metal spots showing, the actual painting that I normally do is all dry brush based. I often find spray painting is better suited to larger models or figures. 15mm figures are a good sweet spot for spray painting, but for 15mm infantry or 6mm figures I often find dry brushing is better, at least for me. A true expert would probably spray most of a 15mm infantry figure, and I have no doubt they would achieve a brilliant job. But as my painting resembles a factory production line rather than an artist workshop, I will stay with what I feel gets the job done acceptably well and also gets it done quickly. But for those who wish to go down the spray painting path, a compressor with an air tank gives you the best result, or at least I originally always thought. However, I've noticed some of the newer, smaller electric compressors, which do not have an air tank or do not seem to have an air tank, seem to do a pretty good job as well of giving me a very even air pressure. Now we come to the paints. I originally used Humbrol enamel paints, however the thinning annoyed me so much I quickly moved to a water-based paint. Initially I gravitated to Tamiya acrylic paints, and I must admit I liked them even today. The only issue was the range of colours, or lack of the range of colours. When you start painting Napoleonic figures or World War II army, this can become an issue, so I had to look for other paints to fill the required gaps I needed to fill in. The Mr. Hobby range contains a lot of the missing colours I needed. I find them rather hard to purchase, especially some of the special weathered paint colours. There are still colours missing from this range, especially for Napoleonic figures. So while this basically satisfied 80% of my issue, I still continued my search for those rare missing colours, specifically for my Napoleonic armies. Villaggio is an excellent range of paints. If you can't find the colour you're looking for, you're not really looking. This is the range I use for those critical, historically accurate colours that I may need, such as Prussian blue or the various shades of Prussian blue. If you're only painting a small number of figures and you know exactly what paints to use, then buying and storing the paints is not an issue. However, as I paint a large number of variable figures, this has become a major issue for me. I tend to have the full range of the various paint brands that I use, so I'm never left in the position where I'm missing a critical colour. I paint in the garage, but do not like to store my paints there due to the wildly variety of temperature that occurs in the garage over the season, so I pack my Tamiya paints in plastic boxes, labelling the number on the top as you can see here. I use the same system for my Villaggio paints. However, trying to identify exactly the paint that I need is a little bit more difficult because I can't really label them. If I do label them, the thing just simply spins over and it's at the bottom of it. But nonetheless, I can generally see what I need to see through the top of the box. For my Mr. Hobby paints, of which I have an awful lot of, I've created a special storage container using an A3 document box. This A3 box is very heavy, but does contain all the paints that I could possibly ever use from this range of paints. When I actually need to paint, I extract the paints I need from the boxes that I need, place them in a small plastic box and take them out to the garage. However, in terms of painting, if you wish to be a painting expert and create something like the figure shown here, you may need to go to a different video, I'm afraid. This image comes from Panzermeister 36 and is very nice indeed. This is my style of painting. It may not be individually very good if you look at an individual figure, but I do like the mass effect. Also, remember, never to skimp on basing. Use high quality bases, high quality flock, and also any additional terrain features that you wish to put on the base, such as bushes or things of that nature, rocks. It really does make a difference. And so we come to an end of my part 39 of my figure gaming hobby series video. In this case, how to go about painting your figures, specifically getting the correct colours, and of course ensuring you can match those colours for any figures you wish to paint later. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.